Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 577. I am your host, Lauren Gray. Thank you so much for joining us on this dog days of summer. I say dog days of summer, even though our dog is comfortably in the air conditioning, but it is hot. And I know from the European perspective that it has been hot. They finally got some relief in some areas. The U.S. is still going under these heat domes in just the south, the west, and of course the torrential rains because of the climate change, shifting them northward and just dumping it all in one central area. Lots of things going on there for it. And then, of course, the wildfires, volcanoes, hurricanes hitting Hawaii. Yeah, it's a lot. And the reason why I bring all that up is just in context. These are the influencing factors that go on with our ebb and flow of business. From what looks like to be a strong, high demand, good ADR, fulfilling occupancy, RevPAR is going to match well, forecasts look good, time to make hay, to all of a sudden the weather changes and that whole scope of demand shifts for people. Now, we've talked about many times over the uniqueness of our world right now, where in spite of the K economy and so many people not having the financial means to do travel below the high income threshold, economically, there's still a persistence of doing it. And as often we've talked about, it's until the people that have the money start changing their purchasing patterns and travel behaviors will we see any sort of downturn in what we're seeing, because we're still seeing moderate growth in occupancy, moderate ADR, although mostly flat in most places. But it isn't into our market yet. Now, there are certain markets that rely upon certain demographics that market hasn't been hit. But in generalities, destination marketing, resort driven, vacation driven, it's still there. We also see the highest debt of people. Credit card debt is the highest it's been. And also national debt. Yeah, we hit the 40 trillion mark in the United States. An unfathomable number to really consider, of that. So lots of things going on. We're actually going to have a show in the next couple of weeks as I frame who I want on host to join us potentially on when does the music stop, or will the music stop, or how will things be different? And it does influence our topic today, because at this time of year, our topics go centric around budgeting, because we're in that budgeting season, August being the collection of data, gathering what we need, identifying parameters of what we think we need to begin to evaluate next year by looking at historical, forensically based content as to how well did we achieve, what influencing factors were on there, like weather variations and what have you. And from that, determine how we're going to map ourselves out for 2027. So to that end, our topic today is budget data. What numbers should you use? Now, the reason why I brought this topic up, and it came out of a discussion of the Hospitality Marketing Club, really, was unlike other years past, where we've had some incremental variations into our business intelligence tools and manipulation, visualization of data. This year has gone through a growth spurt. I wouldn't call it, the dramatic adjectives of life-changing, mind-altering, obsessed with, and all the other crazy words that have to keep going one up over the previous word. But it has been a growth spurt. It has been a lot of change when it comes to not just the data that we use. That in itself has been a growth pattern for a while. You remember the old buzzword big data a few years ago? But now with the buzzword AI, we now have these BI tools that are beginning to give us different variations and insights of the data. And as our last show talked about, and two shows before that, about the data is the same, but how you look at it, the perspective of how you look at it is now becoming a spectrum of choices as to how do you want to evaluate the data. Before, we used to get data very much the way we'd always gotten the data, and we looked at it very much the same way we had historically looked at it, the funnel perspective, total volume of audience, engaged audience, converting audience. And we assign that to the channels and to the relative value that they provided in each of those circumstances and where they landed in the timeline of those engagements. But the numbers were pretty much as they were. We spent this much, we made this much, it cost us, this was the conversion of it, this is our contribution of it. And we had these chunks of ways of looking at it. But now with AI and with the enhancement of business tools and data ways of doing it, the old Excel spreadsheets is still much they are familiar and comfortable, have been blown past into the progressive way we've discussed data as reportive, which has been more the way we had historically done it, predictive, which was what we are able to determine from the data. And then we have now prescriptive, which is the what should you do with the data? What are the answers to this? And we've had some discussions as to the viability of looking at a fully prescriptive model that just simply tells you, here's the information, here's what it's doing, here's what you should do about it. The confidence factors that are needed to make those decisions blindly or to allow them to occur without intervention, and versus the validation, the confidence factor in those choices, not knowing whether it included everything that you as a person knew involved with this. Case in point, our earlier discussion about weather. You would have to include that data set in there to show correlations of the impact of weather variations to your metrics of occupancy and demand and what have you. Also, too, is we were always fed one way of looking at data, which was last click attribution. This is the place it came from. And everything that happened before that was not a measurable means, no interpretive way of doing that. There was first click. What was the first one that happened? That was the first to come onto the scene after last click. And then we got into these other variations, and we got into the third most common used variation right now, which is data driven, which is linearly everything between the inception and conversion has a measurement value. And we know from using this data that it's pretty flat in the, if it gets touched, it's counted, and it's equally distributed between all the touches. There's no impact of frequency, no impact of time decay. Those are variation metrics that you can apply to them. Without sounding overly complex, is we have a lot of flavors to choose from when it comes to how do we look at our data. And now that we're looking at data that we've had historically in our preparation and our process of budget creations for 2027, we have to determine where do we put the stick in the sand and use the data to know how we're going to make our choices, and more importantly, how we're going to measure our choices. Our measuring stick has to be persistent. So what you choose now on your interpretation of data will be the data interpretation you use going forward, because the strategy is based on it, as your measurement of success. So you have to pick, you have to choose well in that sense, because you can't change past. If you change past, you change the value of the metrics to the projections. And as you know, from all the food chain that you have to answer to, you never want to be the one that walks into the room above you and says, hey, remember I told you we're going to do this? Yeah, but we're going to change the metrics, and it's not going to be that number anymore. It's going to be this number. Not a good conversation you want to be you shoot the messenger of. So what are the data sets that you should consider? First and easiest choice to make from is to just keep same old, same old. We've always done last click. It's the most familiar number. If we change it from this, we're going to have to explain the variances so that they understand the changes. So they don't freak out that we said, we were at this level, but we're at this level or this level differently. It's like, what do we do differently? You have to explain that the metrics are going to change. So our interpretation of those metrics will change with it. So it will create issues in the future as you compare your data to old data, that if you don't have the full spectrum of data collection, like with BigQuery or what have you, to be able to go back forensically and look at the old data and make the change to the new way you're looking at the data, new attribution and so forth, so that you can compare apples to apples rather than the persistent disclaimer, hey, that's when we tracked last click. We can't go back and find the data to change it. We're now we're doing data attribution now, which is linear. It's going to give us different numbers. So year over year is going to be skewed because even though it's the same data, as we discussed, it's a different perspective of what the data is telling us happened. And it just is a quick recap of that. We talked about the three principal data streams that are in popularity right now: first click, last click, and data linear. We talked about the fact that last click was giving full attribution to the conversion channel. First click was giving full attribution to the inception channel, the channel that was used to draw the guest in, and linear data was used to track all of the contributing factors associated with that conversion. So there's a dilution as to the individual channels as to a partial contribution value that they assign, which dilutes the numbers down to being more realistically tethered to all of the touch points. Even then, it has its issues. So that's a quick, really fast recap of our show 2 weeks ago. So Making the choice of whether it's keeping in perpetuity to what you may have been doing historically. That's the first choice. And then knowing whether you have the access to the data in such a way that you can change your metrics historically to match your new current methodology. And that only comes from the fact that BigQuery, we talked about way back when GA4 first rolled out, they don't keep the data as long as they used to anymore, and it's much shorter now. And so if you didn't make provisions for that, where you were pulling the data and paying for storage to put it in, you've been reduced down in data. Now, it doesn't mean that the data disappeared. It just means that whatever you collected is all you have. So if you were tracking last click and you weren't attributing any further data beyond that, you have no other data to go to past a certain historical point. And that's why it's very good that you maintain a persistent cumulative data collection, so that if you make these changes like we're talking about today, you have the ability to go back and adjust to your numbers so that there's not a shift from that. Now we're going to. So with that in mind, the next book is, do we concerned or as to the source of our business? Do we want to change our marketing perspective budget, being more about where touching the gas? Now, in a lot of ways today, I know having a larger say in traffic generation, we're seeing more traffic coming from today language models, Gemini, and ChatGPTs of the world, discovering our content and driving traffic to us. And because of that, there's more of an interest of budgeting according to where we're getting the business from. What is the channel that brought the person to us? That's who we want to focus our marketing on. Is we know that they're going to have a process of discovery after that engagement. We know that they're going to change channels as to what they do to learn more about us in the education phase and so forth. And the possibility of which channel they choose at the conversion. When's that ZMOB? When's that moment of transaction occur? Might be from an ad that we gave them, might be from coming to the website and finally making the decision to pull the trigger on what they've been seeing all along. We're not worried and as much as to that channel that provided that final conversion. Interested, yes. Budgeted for, not as much as we are. Maybe we want to budget about where do we find our business? Should we be looking at more money to be spent in channels that get us in front of people? And that question has gotten larger because of the fact that generative AI allows anybody now to operate in that higher funnel, still using the old analogies, that higher funnel of awareness to a large audience that has yet to decide their genuine conversion interest. Meaning, that's what I want. I like what it is. I'm going to hit the button that says buy it. That doesn't happen in the discovery phase. Okay, that the discovery phase is literally that. I didn't know that was there, or oh, that's something to consider, or maybe I should choose differently. That whole process, generative AI has been able to push and elevate individual properties that before didn't have a means to do that. Now, generative isn't the only one. OTT has become more available to more businesses on a singular level than any time in the history. Before, being on TV for us older folks was, oh my God, that's a lot of money. And you go that it was not only a lot of money, but it was a national campaign. Did you really want to spend that much money for what you weren't going to get from, so forth and so on? Now it's so targeted. Your ability to be in front of people through so many filters of geography, demography, behavioral, that there's so many customized ways, channels of interest, mediums, media, whatever, that it's become very viable. And it's not much more. It's actually very similar to what your paid campaigns are on your bigger channels, the Googles and the Bings and what have you of the world, Metas. So you have OTT that can push your property into the higher spectrums of discovery, more awareness of whom you are. You have other mediums, audio advertisements that you can do. You have more destination cultural awareness that you can do, again, with generative, that you can be tethered with your good content, your good SEO, that you become the authoritative center of finding out more about your destination, and hence collectively you as well for being the one that provides it through the discovery process. So you're getting more and more chances now to get into the higher discovery area of the funnel than you ever had before as an individual property. that affects your budget because there's money to be spent there, albeit not money you used to maybe historically spend there, but now you have to consider that in comparison to every place else that you're spending your money. We know that there's been a huge shift. I would say huge. That's an over dramatization. There has been a large shift in the perspective of the value proposition of Meta. Its ever changing advertisement platform has created a little bit of an ambiguity of it because now it's automating more of its processes, taking less of your ability to define what you're wanting to do and having to rely upon them to do it. Not to say Google's not doing anything different about that, but it has kind of done it in blending to your ability to still control your campaigns or ask more of Google to do it for you, where Meta has not given you those choices. Meta is simply say, you used to do this, now you can only do this, and we're doing this for you, and you can't do that anymore, kind of thing. And with mixed results, because that blurring of your ability to control it, you're relying upon an automation process to designate that for you that maybe not as good at it as you would have been for yourself. So you're getting a little pushback from some of the people that decide on spending based on the results that social already was a contributing channel. It had a moderate direct channel value, meaning it helped other channels convert, and it itself converted some to now we know it's probably influencing others. We know it does have an impact on the others. It doesn't take that away, but how it does it and how valuable is it as a direct channel contribution has now changed to how well the algorithm in Meta has actually understood what you're selling. And from that, the production that comes from it. So there's that. You also have more players in the field. You have your TikTok advertisement campaign, which is a whole different medium type. Not that it's not social, but how it influences and how it sells and what it sells best and how it impacts what you're trying to do and say based on the timeliness of its presentation. Instagram, same thing. You have variations now as to the value impact of those channels. So all these things have to come into your budget consideration because you just didn't grow more money to cover the OTT expenses that are now in your consideration. You just didn't grow more money to go into ChatGPT ads, which, by the way, I'm not a big fan of yet because they really don't do not for us anyway, for hospitality, but you can join lots of discussion groups. You can join a hospitality marketing club and have a very open discussion about generative AI advertisement right now as to pros and cons, good or bads, producing something or not producing something. Yeah. Anyways, sorry, just mentally going off on a little tangent on that because we had a great analogy about that doing generative AI advertisement is a lot like a flashlight in a cavern. You only get to see what the light is pointed to. No idea what all the rest of it is. So you looking for something, that's all you see, which can be self-fulfilling. So anyways, leave it at that. It's a very active discussion, needless to say. Join that Hospitality Marketing Club, hospitalitymarketing.club. Put your email in. If you're a hospitality marketer, you can join us, and you can jump right in both feet on that conversation as to the full value of what that represents. But anyways, these are now considerations for your 2027. Also influencing that, and going back to our start of the show, we're talking about weather and so forth, is the ability to begin to create outside data sets to correlate your understanding of the impact of what your numbers are. Because right now, historically, we've been very myopic into how we looked at data. Revenue managers looked at the categories that they are in control of, the ADRs, the RevPAR, the occupancies, GoPARs, contribution percentages, what have you, demand windows, peak demands, gated fences as to when you want to delimit or limit your ability to book and stay, length of stay limitations, and so forth. These are the metric numbers that they use. There are other iterations of that is the contribution factor sources. Where is the business coming from that these rates and inventory availabilities are placed? Group contribution, segmented by the types of group contributions, which have fragmented dramatically in the past few years. Your transient, which has also been, I wouldn't say fragmented, but it has been granularly defined in the same categories that exist. But you have such singular differences now in certain transient types of business that now, because of the data, we have a deeper insight of not just categorizing corporate travel, but there's 5 flavors of corporate travel. You have the startup corporate travel. You have the large corporate travel. You have the cluster corporate travel. You have lots of variations to each of these categories. So it's not like it's shattered into all new categories. There's a lot of new subcategories as that you can actually define them because you have better data to know purpose and type of travel compared to other purposes and types of travel. So in order to math out the revenue as to where you're going to be deriving the revenue manager gets a gross revenue number that the ownership has decided they want to do as a growth pattern for it. And then they start filtering it into the categories of historical contributions of the segments, group versus transient, easiest first split of the funnel. And then from there, it goes into the different little silos as to what sources of revenue they could be coming from. What are the ADR relationships with each of those segments? What is the occupancy that they contribute to? Their GoPar contributions to all the ancillary revenue, so forth. That's the revenue management functions going on right now. It's taking all that and putting it into the stream of that to know where they can meet that goal. Where is their growth opportunity? And marketing, of course, is doing it in a different way. They're looking at source data as to the contributions of those channels, as to what did they do towards the KPI of the total revenue goal for each of the months of last year. What were the things that did it, what the channels that did it, from the way you used to measure it, last click, first click, data stream, whatever, okay? And then determining what yieldability variations there might be for 27. Is there consistency in how the channel performed from last year or this year? Is that going to be moved forward as like, well, they did this much this year, so we're baselining it to do the same next year? Or are we looking at a growth of it? Are we looking at it as a contraction? And I say this just to give a good example. This meta search is an excellent example of knowing whether there's variables to your demand cycle. If you had a spring demand cycle that historically had a booking window that was 44, 60 days out, pre-holiday, Christmas, looking at spring, early January, maybe looking at spring, to now your shortened window of 21 to 7, your channel contributions shift, because where before you may have been engaging with organic content in December about preemptive springtime interest, those aren't really productively doing anything other than front and center placements and feeding potentially traffic towards your shorter term campaign runs that require more immediacy because you're releasing inventory rates and types closer to their actualization than you historically used to do. And you need to then maintain a different rate integrity, which means that whatever offer campaigns you run, say 4 weeks out from the actual arrival, have to be maintained. You can't blink and say, well, we said it was the best deal 4 weeks out, but now there's a lower rate 5 days out because we're not hitting our pace and we're blinking and we're dropping our rate. Metasearch has a huge tool function to that because rates and dates are exactly what Metasearch is in the sweet spot. It offers what people are looking for specifically for that. They've already mentally made the choices that they're interested in. And by either contrast, it's either you option A and then option B on a hotel. And they're just seeing where they're going to go through to get the rate that they want for the choices that they've already made. So Metasearch contribution is a huge litmus test on how well your demand and your rate strategies worked on your cycle of conversions. These all come into play with your budget because your budget has to reflect accurate value cost at the time that you're spending it. There are some flexibility with budget creators that go and say, we're just going to accrue and roll over. We are not going to penalize a use it or lose it mentality. It's like if there's budget to be kept, it's not that we're never not going to give you that budget back, but we're going to take the money and shift it to a channel that is better for what we need to do at that time. But don't worry, we will reconsider what you used to have as a budget in the same context next year, because this year's not the same as last year, and next year's not the same as this year. So when you give that freedom to your departments, that they're going to force feed their spend so that they don't lose the spend, which is self-defeating, you get a lot more flexible channel shifting cost value. Well, that has to be built into the budget, and it has to be given allowances. And there's certain conditional costs that you can't really forecast because they're going to be new to your budgeting cycle. So say, for instance, OTT is our example, and you want to drop another $1,000 a month into OTT where you hadn't before. Maybe it was only $500 before, and you want to up it because there's a value proposition and you're doing it on certain months. Well, your growth of revenue is a projected hopeful, and maybe you're flatlining your growth, which never really goes well. Everybody wants the next bigger number, right? But either which way, that margin may not be sufficient for that cost yield. So you're going to have to deplete some resources from other places to allow you this latitude of expansion for OTT. Where does it come from? Now, right now, easier for some because of their bitterness towards Meta, they like slashing down social pay. Like, okay, it's easier, faster. You know what? This isn't doing as well as we think OTT could do for us. But OTT is up for interpretation of how it lands for what it does. Is it first click value, discovery, put in front of you? This is great. Not every click, your call to action on an OTT works, but the visualization does. So it can feed the demand that goes to the other channels. If you cut off the other channels that you're pushing it to, or that other channels that would normally gather that interest, people go and say, hey, I want to go look that up. And they go online. Are you there? They saw you on TV, but are you representing yourself in the channel that they're choosing to engage you with? If you cut that budget and you're not, they'll see everybody else that shows up for what the show, your ad was telling you were about, and they see everybody you're competing with, and you may lose them to somebody else that just happened to be in the spot that you should have been in. So how you adjust your budgets to contribute to newer channel growth is a gamble, unless you have the funds to be dedicated towards it. And these are the choices. So right now, as you accumulate your data this month for the first growth of our budgeting process, this is the accumulation of data and putting up on the board transitional, maintenance. This is the group business that's rolling over. This is the group business we lost. This is transient demand that is repetitively demand cycle that we can say, spring, summer, whatever. These are the cycles that we know are going to go up. These are the special events that are repeating. These are the special events that aren't repeating. You start mapping yourself out from this to that. Then you start talking about impact values of the channels, what it is that you need to consider for the value that you're spending it on. A lot of these things like OTT, generative, these upper funnel discovery values that you have an indeterminate value right now. It's a spend with an uncertain no of return. There is ways of metrics of saying that you can track, kind of like PR, like, this is how many people seen it, impressions, share. This is some percentage of those impressions you were able to touch, so forth. You can make those assumptive numbers, but as always, it boils down to what check goes into the bank and where to come from. So when you're doing the discovery process of which data, choosing how you're measuring the data or will measure the data compared to how you have been measuring it is a critical first step component to it. There are some amazing new tools out there. I think very specifically of Flip2 with Ed's product that talk about the visualization of data to know your demand cycles better visually. He has a great tool that does that. It does take out outside data sources and brings them in to show their engagement with the processes of what you're doing. So you get some litmus test as to what OTT is currently doing for you. And then you can apply the metrics to it for your future budgeting, perhaps. It may not be apples to apples. It just gives you a stick in the sand that says, well, this is impact value based on this current demand cycle, this current interest, these current ADRs. So we baseline that. Let's do a high, medium, low of impact for a different time segment next year at a different spend amount, and assume that this is the parameters of performance. This is the really happy part that if it did this much, and here's the if it didn't do as well as we had hoped, below the average of what we're seeing it doing right now. You create these parameters, you give nice little portal guidelines to say, this is the highs and low potential. Then as you get closer to your time cycle and you begin to create these campaign performances, you see your pace. We've had some really great shows about pace. And pacing is a huge indicator as to knowing when and how to continue on with a strategy. It's not as soon as it dips below what you expect to dump it. You have to anticipate that there's curves based on allowing it enough time. But pace gives you a sense of whether it's doing what you intended in what level. And that determines whether your budget is correct or flexible and saying, well, this doesn't look like it's going to. So let's go to something that we have a more stable, less performance potential, but more stable growth value for it. It's when you run into we dedicated to spend for it, we're going to spend it regardless of its its end result, and then just go back and say we won't do that ever again. That's when you start doing dumb budgeting decisions, because then you are doing decisions on, we let it run knowing it wasn't good, just to say at the end, we'll not do it again. Where should you just have stopped it, shifted to another thing and said, maybe this wasn't the right time for this, or we didn't do the right content for it. In other words, break it down for the real reason potential of why it wasn't performing what you expected, rather than let it burn and then condemn the fact that you let it burn. It happens a lot more than a lot of people give credit to. So in this early stage, to go to the topic of today, is to really evaluate, what do you want to measure next year? There are some great tools. As I said, there has been a huge growth spurt of tool values and tool capabilities. You can create a paralysis of choice. It's easy to do. You now have so many things you can look at and so many ways to look at it. You can literally sit there and be stumped to knowing what to do. I do think that the use of AI right now is a great helping tool. If you rely on AI to give you an answer, it's not going to be as correct as if you made your own decision, because you don't put in all of the variables that influence what happens. As a human, you do. You know, at certain times there's certain weather, at certain times there's certain travel conditions, or there's certain demand cycles and so forth. And unless that data was put into the AI model to use it as a part of the decision process, it won't take that in consideration. And even if you say, well, I put in the kitchen sink, I put in the weather, the traffic, the event schedules, everything else, so it knows everything that's going on, that's great. Except by putting in more variables, and we've had this discussion on AI prescriptive modeling a few shows back, is you create a paralysis of choice for the AI. If they're all equal in value, there's so many variables that impact what you're asking it to do. It will create an ambiguous center point that says, based on everything you told me that is an influence, it's good to do nothing, because doing anything, none of the contributing data sources recommend. So you have to prioritize your data value that you're using in the AI model to make sure that it influences it at the same level that you as a human. Instead of going through that whole process, because even if it did that, you'd have a confidence issue with the AI. You would still second guess it into saying, yeah, is it really? I mean, it's close. It's close to what I thought, but do I completely agree with it? So there's still a human decision. So leave it as being a really helpful tool that can really grind through some of the large number stuff. Like, ask it things like, give me, complete weather patterns of our destination over the first 90 days of this year. And did that correlate with any changes in cancellations? Well, you have to get the data cancellation list. You have to get the PMS data cancellation list to know that. So there's ways of making this all work, but you got to think through what those processes are to know how to map out those kind of choices to have them as influencing factors on your 27 budget program. We're going to talk a lot more about budgets. I mean, this is just the bottom of the hill in the discussion of our budget season this year. And it will be an interesting one, because we do have all these resources now of data, and we do have all these new resources now of business intelligence tools to kind of sort through and figure out better ways of understanding things so we make better choices for 2027. Plus all the outside influencing factors that are going on, politics and economics and so forth, they're going to influence what happens going forward for us in 27. So with that, I appreciate everyone that watches us live on the Hospitality channel, on your smart TV, Google, Amazon, Roku, so forth and so on, Apple. Then also for those that watch us on their iPhone and or Google or Android phone, we have our app, Hospitality Channel, which you can watch on your iPad as well, I guess, or your tablet. We also simulcast on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, are all there. And then, of course, the show goes on to Hospitality Radio. We have our radio station as well. So we have our TV channel that goes to 209 countries. Our radio station that goes to 39 countries. Our radio station, hospitalityradio.com, is also a podcast, our audio podcast, which is on Apple and iHeart and Spotify and on and on and on. We're on lots of channels for our podcast. I think there's 37 total channels on that. We do translate subtitles for the live show in 11 languages, which are the large population languages that we shift and move a few of them over the course of time from around the world. And we recast the show at 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time, and London time for our APAC and EU and Mideast friends to be able to catch more reasonable time. But even with that said, on the live show, we still get an amazing amount of followers that watch us live in the most amazing time zones to do that. And as always, thank you for that loyalty of watching and listening. Of course, any feedback you have, any insights, any comments, what have you, please feel free to reach out to me at Lauren at hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. I have been batting 1,000, always have in their relationship of always answering each and every email related to any comments about the TV station show or our radio station show or podcasts with all of that. And I think that is about it. So with that, my name is Lauren Gray. I thank you for the privilege of your time and look forward to talking to you all next week.